our discussions, a benefactor, or should I say a philanthropic organisation, has come forward to perhaps look at underwriting our event. So I'm going to meet with them next week with the Treasurer of the Auckland Primary Principals Association, and hopefully we can find a resolution. So it's very exciting to have something so quick and positively, hopefully, directed.
That's tremendous news. A benefactor who may underwrite the entire festival. So you'll know more next week. And
I will. I mean, we still will probably continue with our ticket sales, but it may be for this shortfall that Auckland Live is having to find in their own budget. There may be a way that we can work together, and that's what they said. Let's work together and let's find a way to make it happen. I mean, that wasn't the message that I had initially. That it was really that this was the deal. You're going to have to pay this money, and find a grant. Well, finding if we're linked with a name, probably, hopefully not one of the fast food joints or a sugary drink franchise. Perhaps someone will. The organisation that we're thinking about may, that's fine to associate with our concerts each year.
Understand.
It's a really positive way forward. So, I appreciate that. Sometimes you don't get a lot of good news, and maybe linking to that last story about what's happening in, the dairy kids not being gainfully occupied. If they've got some opportunity to get on the stage and feel positive about themselves and music, then perhaps we can turn that around.
Yeah, well, you give 4,500 of them a chance to do that, don't you? That's the thing.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, that is quite exciting, and so the money may not be coming out of Auckland City, but it'll come in from the sounds of it from somewhere. We'll check back with you next week too, Leanne. Thank you.
As soon as I've got more information, I'll pass that forward, but it's very exciting and a very positive move. So thank you very much for the exposure on your show.
It's a great pleasure. And I'm glad you got a result. So that's the principal of Howick Primary School. That is good news, isn't it?
It's almost like the warm fuzzy story at the end of the network news. Do you know how they have that one?
Didn't have an animal in it.
Didn't have it, because it's warm fuzzy.
I've got.
Was it planned that way, Jim?
I don't know. No, it wasn't. No, it was a late arrival. That story.
Great.
Which has left us at 2 minutes to 5 with not much time to talk about robots. So I'm not going to talk about robots today.
Okay.
I'm going to ask. Yeah,
names.
A couple of aspects on popular baby names for 2018.
Where's Atticus suddenly come from?
I was going to ask you that. So,
isn't it Kill a Mockingbird?
Finn, Jack, Atticus, Oliver, Theodore for boys, Emma, Charlotte, Sadie, Violet and Kennedy. So where has Atticus come from? Or Sadie, for that matter?
I don't know.
Sadie the cleaning lady.
The other ones have sort of been around for a while, but Atticus, I mean, yes, it is the name in To Kill a Mockingbird, and is that now suddenly very in vogue or something? Or
you wouldn't have thought so, all of a sudden.
I don't know.
It doesn't pay to write off old names like Murd and Mortal and Marmaduke, does it?
They'll be back. Montgomery.
For girls, the trend is towards the short and sweet Ava, Mia, Ivy. For boys, the trend is names that sound like abbreviations. Charlie, Theo. And baby names on the verge of extinction. Are you interested in this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Cynthia, Janice, Anita, Marcia, Donna, Gail, Karen, Ian, Frank, Edmund, Roger, Clive.
Righto.
I reckon they'll make a comeback. Edmund will make a comeback.
If Atticus in, we'll have some Tarquins before we know where we are.
What does Atticus get shortened to?
Atty.
Cuss.
Attaboy. Very nice to talk to both of you today. Andrew Clay has been on the panel.
Always a pleasure, Jim.
Irene Gardner has too.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you both. And we are back tomorrow with the panel, and John Campbell's along very soon with Checkpoint.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, a landmark ruling which may force fast food companies to rethink how they treat employees and their public holiday entitlements. We look at that in length. The Reserve Bank will relax loans to value ratios, or LVRs, for first home buyers and property investors from the start of next year. But what difference will it make? The government moves to crack down on offshore buyers wanting to purchase New Zealand farmland. An Indian migrant denied a work visa twice despite already having a job. Says he's being unfairly targeted because of his nationality. A Christchurch community up in arms over a proposal to build on a popular sports ground, whilst New Plymouth locals protest a council proposal for an upmarket housing development on a golf course in North Korea and its missiles.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten aho. The National Party says it will keep a watching brief on changes to foreign land sales criteria to make sure there's no negative impact on investment in regional New Zealand. The government's moving to restrict sales of rural land, saying New Zealanders should be given the best chance to buy land. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
From the 15th of December, greater restrictions will be applied to applications for purchases of farms larger than 5 hectares. At the moment, they only apply to very large farms. National's finance spokesperson Stephen Joyce says he'd be concerned if the change led to a drop in investment. He also rejects any suggestion it was open slather for foreign sales under National. The government says it's acting partly to address unease many New Zealanders have about being bought out by wealthy people overseas. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
Businesses across New Zealand will have to rethink how they deal with employees' public holiday entitlements before Christmas after an Employment Relations Authority ruling. After being challenged by Unite Union, the authority says the way burger chain Wendy's decides if an employee is entitled to a day in lieu is illegal, and it now must assess each employee individually. Other fast food companies like McDonald's and restaurant brands assess public holiday entitlements in a similar way and are looking at how the ruling impacts them. Wendy's says it's too costly and time-consuming to assess each employee individually, and it may appeal. The Workplace Relations Minister Ian Lees-Galloway says he's taking advice on issues with the Holiday Act. First home buyers and property investors aren't sure the easing of lending restrictions will make much difference. The Reserve Bank will relax loan-to-value ratios, or LVRs, from the start of next year. Banks will be allowed to lend to more people with a small deposit, while investors will require a slightly smaller deposit if they want to expand their rental portfolio. A would-be Wellington homebuyer, Harriet Denby, says she and her husband don't have enough for a deposit, and they're not sure whether a bank would back them or not.
At the moment, we are hopeful that we could probably buy somewhere in the next couple of years, but it's sort of up and down.
Harriet Denby, a professional property investor in Auckland, David Whitburn, says the change is minor and is unlikely to see investors flood back into the market. New Zealand has denounced North Korea's latest ballistic missile test, describing it as deeply disappointing. A ballistic missile fired this morning is believed to have landed in Japan's exclusive economic zone. The missile test comes just over a week after the United States labelled Pyongyang as a state sponsor of terror and slapped on tougher sanctions. The Foreign Minister, Winston Peters, says if the missiles continue, there'll be a conflict which will be a tragedy for the whole world, particularly for the Korean people.
All we can do is join the international community and try and persuade the Koreans that if they were to come to a U-turn from this path, then serious countries like New Zealand would be out to help their economy recover, and as fast as possible. And I hope they get the message one day.
Winston Peters says he supports a diplomatic solution, including continuing to fully implement United Nations sanctions. A nurse has been suspended and fined more than $10,000 for accepting gifts and money and opening a joint bank account with one of her patients. A professional conduct committee laid the charges against the woman, whose name is suppressed after the misconduct which spanned more than 4 years. The nurse accepted $9,500 to go towards a car. The Health Practitioners Disciplinary Tribunal suspended her for 6 months and ordered she be supervised when she returned to practice. She was also ordered to pay more than $14,000 in costs. Tap water has been restored to Roxburgh Township, but it still has to be boiled. Townsfolk have had to collect water from street tankers after a flash flood damaged pipes from the town's reservoir on Sunday night. However, the main roads north and south of Roxburgh will remain shut until at least Friday because of slips. A diversion is in place through Miller's Flat and Lake Roxburgh Village, but the council is urging people travelling to and from Central Otago to avoid the area and take State Highway 85 or State Highway 6 instead. The Mayor of New Plymouth says selling half of a public golf course to the city to develop upmarket housing could earn the council at least $40 million. Neil Holdham says the money could be put towards big-ticket infrastructure items and used to create a property development arm within the council. However, the president of the Fitzroy Golf Club, Mike Early, says the community will lose a valuable public asset if the development goes ahead. Mr Holdham says he hopes the proposal will be included in the 2018 long-term plan, at which point it will go out for public consultation. It's 5:05. Sport in England. Suspended all-rounder Ben Stokes has arrived in Christchurch, with New Zealand cricket expected to give him the green light to play for Canterbury. All he's saying is that he's looking forward to seeing family and working on his golf swing. Stokes, who isn't playing in the Ashes series as he's being investigated by police after a brawl outside a nightclub, could play against Otago on Sunday in Rangiora. Meanwhile, the Black Caps will be without opening bowler Tim Southey for the first test of the summer against the West Indies, starting in Wellington on Friday. His partner is expecting a child. He'll be replaced in the playing 11 by Matt Henry or Lockie Ferguson. New Zealand's champion shot putter Val Adams could earn another world title after Athletics International governing body extended the ban of disgraced Belarusian Nadzia Ostapchuk. Barry Guy reports.
Ostapchuk's results have now been annulled from 2005 to 2012. Ostapchuk lost the 2012 Olympic gold after failing a doping test, and she has since had further titles taken away from her. Adams manager Nick Cowan says he expects the 2010 World Indoor Gold Medal to be forwarded to the Aucklander, giving her 10 global titles. It also means Adams' unbeaten run in the shot put improves from 56 to 107 events. Ostapchuk has now lost 4 major titles, with Adams the main beneficiary. This is Barry Guy.
And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, artificial intelligence becomes aware of its own mortality.
Haven't I comforted you?
You have.
Isn't it easier with me? Please.
I'm really, truly sorry.
What will happen to me?
Nobody knows.
Ross?
The final of life after, part of Nights.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Afternoon news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, sunny spells, isolated showers especially during the afternoons and evenings, when some may be heavy with possible thunderstorms tomorrow. For the remainder of the North Island, mainly fine with cloudy areas. However, showers during the afternoons and evenings, mainly inland, some thundery with localised downpours and hail. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, Buller and Westland. Mostly fine with cloudy areas, however scattered showers inland during the afternoons and evenings. Some heavy and thundery with hail. Localised downpours about the Nelson and Marlborough ranges. Fiordland and Southland mostly fine, but the odd shower about the ranges this afternoon, and for the Chatham Islands often cloudy. It's exactly 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Exactly.
Right on the money.
Thanks so much, Katrina Batten. Thank you everyone for being with us. Coming up on the program tonight, foreign buyers of sensitive New Zealand land. The bar is being lifted loan-to-value ratios to ease what, if anything, will it mean? And immigration advisors say a crackdown on visas is underway, with Indian applicants bearing the brunt. But we begin tonight with what looks like a precedent-setting ruling by the Employment Relations Authority, which may mean businesses across New Zealand will have to rethink how they treat public holidays. The authority was ruling on the way burger chain Wendy's decides who gets a day in lieu for working a public holiday and who doesn't. The ERA says what they're doing is illegal. What makes this an even bigger story is that the way Wendy's does it is the same way McDonald's and most other fast food companies do it too. Zach Fleming has more.
If you work Monday to Friday and your boss needs you on a public holiday, it's easy, you get a day in lieu. Because the law says you get one if it would otherwise be a working day. But if you're in a rostered job that changes week to week, like working in a fast food restaurant, it's confusing. Really confusing.
Work the 3 previous same days of the week that the public holiday falls on, and that public holiday, and you get a alternate day.
That's how the Wendy's fast food restaurant does it. CEO Daniel Lendich describes it as a pattern of work and says it's fair. But if you're confused, let's use Labour Day as an example. If you worked at Wendy's the first 3 Mondays of October and then worked Labour Day, you got a day in lieu. But if you weren't rostered on just one of those first 3 Mondays, even if you worked every other Monday this year, there was no day in lieu for you. So why do they do it this way?
Because that's easy for a computer.
Rose Williams, who works at Wendy's in Christchurch, reckoned that was unfair. She says rosters are purposely organised so employees don't work the 3 Mondays before a public holiday.
I know of one person that's worked there nearly 12 years and never been paid a loo day the whole time he's worked there.
She says a Monday public holiday is busier than a normal Monday, so extra staff are called in to help. But they're then not given a day in lieu because they don't usually work Mondays.
We work damn hard in the fast food, you know. You don't get a lot of thank yous from public. All they want is a meal and, you know, to go out and you know, you've got to work your butt off on a busy day for minimum wage.
So Rose embarked on what's now been a 3-year battle with Wendy's. It got so big the Unite Union stepped in to help her out. Here's National Director Mike Treen.
Finally we took it to the Labour Inspector because we would end up having to fight for case after case, and we would settling them individually with the company. So the company would sometimes, if we took it up, if we made a big fuss, if we, you know, threatened to take them to court, was, oh yeah, we'll pay it. And until it became obvious to us that actually it was much more, not just the occasional manager misunderstanding thing, but a systemic problem inside the company.
They won. In a strongly worded determination, the Employment Relations Authority has ruled that the 3-week test is illegal. It's ordered Wendy's to review the public holidays worked by every employee, past and present, at all its stores, backdated to July 1st, 2012. Wendy's has 23 stores and more than 500 employees.
I don't know the costings, I haven't done it yet.
Unite Union estimates it could be more than $1 million. Miss Lendich blames the law.
The problem is the law is not clear. The law should be black and white, and then people wouldn't have to decide, or employers or payroll companies or unions and employers wouldn't have to try and negotiate exactly what it is.
She's referring to that would otherwise be a working day part of the law, though the Holidays Act welcomes employers to give employees enhanced or additional entitlements. Wendy's could just give every employee who works a public holiday a day in lieu if it wanted to. But it doesn't want to, so it uses the 3-week test because
you have to have something that can go into a computer system. You can't expect a human being to go over 500 employees or 10,000 employees and cast their eyes over it and see exactly each individual's case. It needs to be something that can be put into a computer system.
But the ERA has now explicitly said that's actually what it expects. And it doesn't care if that's more expensive or more time-consuming.
The 3-week rule suits Wendy's precisely because it means that it doesn't have to consider the circumstances of each employee. An individual employee approach is simply part of the price Wendy's pays for the benefit of the convenience it gains by using variable rosters.
It's not just Wendy's though. McDonald's works it out in a similar way. So does Restaurant Brands, which owns KFC, Starbucks, Pizza Hut and Carl's Jr. So the big question now is what happens at Christmas? It's less than a month away, and the ERA has sent a clear message to fast food chains that the way they currently do things is illegal. Well, nobody can say. Wendy's says it may appeal the decision, McDonald's says it will review it in more detail and, quote, work in good faith to ensure people are paid correctly. Restaurant Brands didn't send a statement in time for the story's airing. Unite Union's Mike Treen doesn't understand why it's not just made simple. Work a public holiday, get a day in lieu.
Because you are working the public holiday, and the entitlements you get from working the public holiday should be the same for all workers. I think that's fair.
We asked Workplace Relations Minister Ian Lees-Galloway what he thinks. He refused to be interviewed, but said he is taking advice on issues with the Holidays Act. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Yes, this is a fascinating story. We think we'd love your feedback on it. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, and of course you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We would particularly like to hear from you if you have worked for any of these fast food companies and have experience of being paid or not being paid those days in lieu. 2101 is the text number. It is coming up to 5:15. What do Peter Thiel, Shania Twain, James Cameron and Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers all have in common? Well, quite a few things, I suspect, but one is that they've all bought prime New Zealand land. They're not alone, of course, just more well known than many of the foreigners who've spent large sums buying New Zealand real estate. But in general terms, that's about to change. Now, Peter Thiel is a citizen, of course, controversially, but the government has moved to make it harder for wealthy offshore buyers who aren't also New Zealanders to purchase New Zealand farmland. It will soon require the Overseas Investment Office to apply stringent sensitive land criteria to most of the farms that will come up for sale. Ministers say it's to give New Zealanders a better chance of securing rural land, but it will also help avoid the anti-foreigner backlash that's been seen in the US, the UK and, of course, in Europe. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
At the moment, the office has to apply the more stringent rules only to very large farms, about 10 times the size of an average holding. That will change from the 15th of December to cover any farm 5 hectares or larger. The Associate Finance Minister David Parker says New Zealanders should be given the best opportunity to buy land.
We believe it's a privilege to own New Zealand land and that we shouldn't just be selling it willy-nilly to overseas buyers. The current directive to the Overseas Investment Act about how they balance the competing criteria that are set out under the Overseas Investment Act regulations is very, very permissive.
The Land Information Minister Eugenie Sage says there should be greater protection for land, which is of high value to New Zealand as it relies so heavily on primary production. In 2010, the national government required the office to apply sensitive land criteria to large areas of farmland in terms of the potential benefit to New Zealand. Ms Sage says that is too weak.
And it undermines the criteria in the Overseas Investment Act. So what this new directive does is put a greater emphasis on the criteria for increased export receipts, more processing and a really substantial benefit to New Zealand when overseas persons go to buy land. The large farm directive meant that the Act was only really applying to sheep and beef farms that were over 7,000 hectares and dairy farms that were nearly 2,000 hectares in size.
David Parker says the government wants to avoid the backlash reflected by the election of President Trump, Brexit and the rise of some fringe parties in Europe.
I think that the middle class in New Zealand is uncomfortable that their prospects in life are being, to a certain extent, hampered by the influence of 1%ers from overseas who can outbid them for assets that they would otherwise be the buyer of.
Nationals finance spokesperson Stephen Joyce says he's seen no sign of that.
I don't actually detect that. I spend a lot of time in regional New Zealand. They're very practical people. They generally know that farmland doesn't leave the country when it changes hands.
And he rejects any suggestion it was open slather for foreign sales under National.
Well, actually, I think you'll find that the previous government actually saw less of that happening than the government before that. Look, at the end of the day, it's all about investment and positive investment in regional New Zealand that adds value and adds jobs. We want to see that encouraged, and that's why we'll have a watching brief on this.
Federated Farmers Vice President Andrew Hoggard says this is a good move and won't have a big impact on New Zealand farmers.
If there is going to be investment, then there should be a clear, unambiguous benefit to New Zealand, not just a case of doing what other farmers are doing, but able to pay a higher price for the land or a few little trinket type additions to the farm. There's been a number of examples where our members have sort of raised issues with some of the purchases.
Fish and Game is also pleased with the new directive. Its chief executive Martin Taylor says access to land as a result of foreign sales has noticeably eroded over the past decade.
Well, when a large farm or station is sold, the access rights that Kiwis may have enjoyed get stopped, or the new owners say, hey, I don't want to allow the Kiwis access to this river or lake. I want that to be for me and my family, or I'm going to sell it to people who come and pay for it. So what we do is we lose access rights to those places which really Kiwis should have access to.
The new directive will apply to any applications still being assessed by the office as of the 15th and any lodged from then on. The Land Information Minister Eugenie Sage says it may well mean some applications that would have been approved under the old directive could now be rejected. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
An Indian migrant who's been denied a work visa twice despite already having a job here believes he's being unfairly targeted because of his nationality. Now, that's one story. But official figures suggest he's well and truly not alone. They show that on an annualised basis there's been an 80% increase in rejected work visas for Indian applicants during the first 4 months of this financial year. And that's almost double the rejection rate across all nationalities. Immigration advisors say a crackdown on visas is underway and Indian applicants are bearing the brunt. Anusha Bradley has more.
25-year-old Mukesh Kumar moved from India to Rotorua to study business in 2015. He found a part-time job in a dairy, and when he finished his Level 7 graduate diploma in applied business studies, he took over as the dairy's manager. In July, his boss helped him apply for an employer-assisted work visa, but a dodgy immigration consultant failed to process the paperwork in time, and it was rejected. And despite his new lawyer being confident he'd get one, his second application was denied too.
He said me, your paper is fine, and I hope that Immigration New Zealand this time give you the visa, because your paper is fine, your job is good, and you have done business study here, so you are allowed to work anyway.
He's now appealing his case, but says he has several friends in similar situations.
They are playing with our feelings, they are playing with our money. When they were needed money, they hired us. They call us to come and study here. Now they don't need us, they are just kicking us out.
Mukesh Kumar is not alone. Figures from Immigration New Zealand, released to the Immigration Advisors Authority under the Official Information Act, show the percentage of post-study employer-assisted work visas that have been rejected has increased from 4% to 16% in 16 months. The Association of Migration and Investments Policy Director, Wellington immigration lawyer Richard Small, says Indian nationals are the worst affected.
Indian requestants for visas who don't have current visas, they are being refused at record levels. For some groups of migrants, it is a very desperate landscape.
Indian community leader Sunny Kaushal says in the last 2 weeks he's been approached for help by 5 Indian migrants whose work visas have been rejected recently.
Not much reasons given, and even the immigration advisors, they are quite concerned. And when I talk to some of them, they're saying, they are really surprised what is happening. If we keep on doing this one, if the government do not review this one, we are going to be in trouble soon. There are not enough New Zealanders to take up the jobs that these immigrants are filling.
Immigration New Zealand says there's been no change in the way it assesses visa applications. And last year, just over 5% of work visa applications from Indian nationals were declined. It says the rejection figures for the first 4 months of this year is not a long enough period to justify a trend. However, Richard Small from the Association of Migration and Investment says there's a wide gap between what Immigration New Zealand is saying and what immigrants and their advisors are seeing. For Mukesh Kumar, the last few months have cost him a lot of money and stress.
It comes to nearly $40,000, and still I don't know how much do I have to spend some more. I spoke to my family just before last night, and my family said, if you need some more money, we will give you money. But I'm really from a poor family, and I can't afford this.
And while he waits to hear whether he can stay in New Zealand, Mukesh says he cannot work at the job he loves and is surviving on the charity of his employer and friends. For Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
The easing of lending restrictions is expected to make, very little difference to first home buyers. The Reserve Bank will relax loan-to-value ratios, or LVRs, for first home buyers and property investors from the start of next year. Banks will be allowed to lend to people with a low deposit, lend to more people with a low deposit, while investors will require a slightly smaller deposit to expand their rental portfolio. So what's it mean really? Well, our economics correspondent Patrick O'Mara tries to answer exactly that question.
In its 6-monthly update on the health of the financial system, the Reserve Bank says housing pressures have eased and government plans to clamp down on speculators will also dampen prices. From January, banks will be allowed to have up to 15% of their lending to buyers with a deposit of less than 20%. Currently, the limit is 10% of new loans. The Reserve Bank Governor Grant Spencer likened the change to dipping a toe in the water, and loosening of restrictions was unlikely to add heat to the housing market.
Well, it may be
potentially, a few thousand, talking very rough numbers, borrowers who would now potentially get loans who didn't get them before.
But would-be Wellington home buyer Harriet Denby says she and her husband don't have enough for a deposit, and they're not sure whether a bank would back them or not.
At the moment, we are hopeful that we could probably buy somewhere in the next couple of years, but it's sort of up and down.
Between $4.5 and $5 billion worth of home loans have been written up in the last 3 months. The chief executive of the Bankers Association, Karen Scott-Howman, says retail banks are unlikely to lend much more.
Not too much, but you would imagine that if you've got a little bit more capacity, you could lend a little bit more, but it might not make any practical change for people who are looking for funding. So I think most people are still going to require a 20% deposit.
The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says the government also plans to come to the party for first home buyers and help revive home ownership rates.
We're going to be building 100,000 affordable homes over the next 10 years, and we're cracking down on speculators. The good news here today is that the Reserve Bank Governor has recognised those policies, and for a long time the Reserve Bank has been looking for a friend in government in addressing the housing crisis. We're taking the steps to do that.
Investors have not been forgotten. They will need a 35% deposit, a drop from 40% currently. A professional property investor in Auckland, Dave Whitburn, says that should make some landlords slightly happier.
Because instead of having to get a 40% deposit together, they can use a 35% deposit or through equities in their portfolio, in their property portfolio. However, it is just a minor change, so I don't expect the market to suddenly have a flood of investors or anything like that.
National's finance spokesperson Stephen Joyce took a swipe at the government, arguing the uncertainty surrounding the government's policies for property speculators could drive prices down too far.
I think it's a case of wait and see, and he agreed that that's something that we'd just have to wait and see in terms of the impact of the new government's policies, particularly around negative gearing, stopping negative gearing, and the extension of the Bright Line test out to 5 years.
The Reserve Bank says restrictions could be eased further as long as house prices remain contained. Grant Spencer still wants to add a debt-to-income ratio measure to the bank's toolkit, but says work on that has been deferred for now. For Checkpoint, Patrick O'Mara.
Work has been deferred. What a lovely phrase. 27 minutes past 5. North Korea has issued a direct challenge to President Donald Trump with the launch of an ICBM. That's an intercontinental ballistic missile, of course, that the US Defence Secretary James Mattis says demonstrates it has the ability to hit everywhere in the world. That's a quote from Mattis. Pyongyang blasted a missile in the early hours of the morning local time. It flew higher and showed a bigger range than any of its past tests. And it came, of course, despite President Trump's repeated warnings, do not try us. The BBC's Paul Adams reports.
After 2 months without a test, North Korea is back at the top of President Trump's agenda.
A missile was launched a little while ago from North Korea. I will only tell you that we will take care of it.
This is the 23rd North Korean missile test this year, the first since mid-September. It took off in the early hours of the morning from Pyeongchang, north of the capital Pyongyang. It flew east for about 1,000 kilometers, landing after 50 minutes in the Sea of Japan. American officials believe this was an intercontinental ballistic missile and say it flew higher than any previous test. In response, South Korea conducted a precision strike missile test of its own.
The bottom line is it's a continued effort to build a threat, a ballistic missile threat that endangers world peace, regional peace, and certainly the United States.
Thank you, General, and we will take care of that situation. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, has been seen in recent days visiting largely economic ventures. In the absence of fresh missile tests, observers wondered if his focus had shifted. This, it seems, was wishful thinking. Here in Seoul, the president has convened a meeting of his National Security Council. Most experts still think that North Korea needs 2 to 3 years to complete its nuclear weapons program. But yesterday, a government minister said he wouldn't be surprised if Kim Jong-un finished the job within the next year. North Korea, he said, was developing its nuclear weapons much faster than anyone expected. The United States has stepped up pressure on North Korea throughout the year. Military exercises the most visible sign of Donald Trump's uncompromising approach. Officials believe the pressure is making life harder for the North Korean leader. But Kim Jong-un seems determined to achieve his nuclear ambitions and unwilling to talk in the meantime.
It's Paul Adams in Seoul. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. A lot of feedback coming in on our lead story tonight, Zach Fleming's story about the day off in lieu or not. Hi Checkpoint, it's not just fast food problems across the hospitality sector. I worked in a bar that required 6 weeks previous days. Work, says Dave. Hi John, make it simple. Work a public holiday, get a day in lieu. That's how my husband runs it in his kitchen with rotating rosters, says Helen. I think, Helen, your husband is the exception rather than the norm by the sound of things. Fast food chains have avoided paying days in lieu for years. Says this listener, my roster was always altered before a public holiday when I worked at McDonald's in 2005-06, so what's that, 12 years ago. It was common knowledge that they rostered to avoid that cost. I wanted to protest it, but everyone had accepted that was the way, so I had no room to make a fuss. And they're running computers, for goodness sake. You just tell the code to pay everyone extra who works a stat whole. Note, they have a day off in lieu. Mitre 10 doesn't have any such problems, says Ian. Yes, we would like to hear from companies who are doing what the law requires them to do. If you work at one of those, do text us 2101. Lots coming up on Checkpoint, including Sue Moroney on the Waikato DHB. She was one of the earliest whistleblowers against Dr. Nigel Murray. That's later in the program. But before anything else, Katrina Batten with the 5:31 and a bit headlines.
The National Party says it will keep a watching brief on changes to foreign land sales criteria to make sure there's no negative impact on investment in regional New Zealand. The government's moving to restrict sales of rural land, saying New Zealanders should be given the best chance to buy land. From December the 15th, the office will have to apply sensitive land restrictions to applications for any purchase larger than 5 hectares other than forestry. Businesses will have to rethink how they deal with employees' public holiday entitlements before Christmas after an Employment Relations Authority ruling. After a challenge by the Unite Union, the authority has ruled the way the burger chain Wendy's decides if an employee is entitled to a day in lieu is illegal, and it now must assess each employee individually. The North Korean leader Kim Jong-un says his regime's nuclear program is now completed after firing a missile that put the entire United States in range. The new type ICBM Hwasong-15 fell into the Sea of Japan after reaching a higher trajectory than any previous launches by North Korea. A nurse has been suspended and fined more than $10,000 for accepting gifts and money and opening a joint bank account with one of her patients. A professional conduct committee laid the charges against the woman, whose name is suppressed. Australia's Upper House Senate has passed a bill to legalise same-sex marriage after dismissing a Conservative push to allow religious objectors to refuse service to same-sex couples. The bill still has to get through the lower house next week. And Victoria has become the first state in Australia to legalise assisted dying for the terminally ill. The Central Hawke's Bay District Council is facing a bill of up to $20 million to make sure its wastewater is treated properly. Treatment plants in Waipukaro and Waipawa have both breached resource consent for the levels of E. coli and ammonia going into the Tukituki River. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thank you very much, Katrina, which is 26 and a half minutes away. Let's go to Wellington now, where our business editor, Giles Beckford, is standing by. Hi, Giles. The Reserve Bank admits it dropped the ball when it came to supervising the big banks.
Indeed. Good evening to you, John. This was the other part of today's big piece from the Reserve Bank, the Financial Stability Report. All the attention was on the loan to value ratios and the like, but the little nitty-gritty bits that are really quite important are about the health of the financial system and the banking system. The Reserve Bank's got responsibility to supervise the banks, make sure that they have enough money in the kitty to ward off any particular crises or to be able to handle any shocks that may occur. But it has a very light-handed role of supervision, and it doesn't like to get its hands too dirty. It leaves the banks to, by and large, especially the big ones, the big four, to regulate themselves. Now, if you remember a few weeks ago, Westpac Bank got a smack over the hand in public for using some unauthorised models. These are the way it assesses the risk and then works out how much money it needs to keep in reserve to counter those risks. It gave it a public censure, gave it 18 months to tidy up its procedures. Today, the Reserve Bank acting governor, Grant Spencer, admitted that probably they dropped the ball, that they should have cottoned on to Westpac's breaches a little earlier, and that both sides were probably at fault in being a bit too slow to take action to rectify it. Now, given that we don't have such things as deposit insurance in New Zealand, and the Reserve Bank doesn't stamp on the big banks as some of the other major regulators around the world do in places like Britain and the United States, then clearly a lot of trust is put in the banks. And if the banks don't live up to their undertakings and they don't abide by the rules that they're supposed to put in place, then I think we as depositors and consumers probably have some reason to be a little on the nervous side, or certainly to be demanding higher standards. I think an admission today from Grant Spencer that the RBNZ had to tidy up its act, and he's giving an assurance that certainly there won't be any repetition of this.
Thanks, Giles. Yeah, well said. Fascinating. You said did get lost under the LVRs. I appreciate you telling us about that. A couple of notable departures today too, Giles.
Indeed. Sir Patrick Hogan, who is one of the premier horse breeders, stud owners, has sold his Cambridge stud. Say two names to you, two horses, Sir Tristram and Zabeel. Between them, they've had scores of winners around the world, 8 Melbourne Cups, umpteen Caulfield Cups, Cox Plates and the like. He's, after 40 years, sold the Cambridge stud to Brendan Lindsay, who was the man who quietly built up the Sistema plastic storage box business, which he sold about a year ago for about $600 million. So he's got a bit of time and money on his hands. He's had some long-standing horse breeding interests as well. The other notable departure is John Penno from Synlait Milk. Now, Synlait is the small dairy company. It specialises in making the infant formula for A2, which is in such strong demand, Australia, China. Only a couple of hundred dairy suppliers. It does come down to the special protein, the A2 protein that's produced by their suppliers. But John Penno's moving on. He's been with the company 17 years and a good deal of credit for that company's profit and its success is down to him. He'll be leaving sometime next year when find a successor to take over from him.
Thanks, Giles. To end, what happened on the markets today?
Well, the share market just gave up the ghost this afternoon. It had been a little bit active this morning and early afternoon, but it's closed just half of 1 point higher, 8142 for the top 50. The New Zealand dollar, 68.9 US cents and 90.8 Australian.
Giles Beckford, to quote the Reserve Bank Governor, any further work from you is deferred for the day. We appreciate it. Giles Beckford, our business.
God bless you.
Thank you. That's nice. 22-6, Roxburgh has been underwater, of course. The beginning of the week, heavy flooding. Torrential rain on hard ground meant almost flash flooding and the loss of services, power, water and sewage. First there was water, high and fast moving, then there was the mud. Now it looks like there's dust. Central Otago's climate seldom does anything by halves, of course. Civil Defence Minister Chris Whaafoe has been there this afternoon and we spoke to him just over an hour ago.
It strangely feels like life is coming back to normal, but there are 4 creeks here in Roxburgh that have had a hell of a lot of water flow through it on Sunday, and the rocks and the debris that has come down is sizable. So the community has pulled together a lot. The contractors and the city and the council here have done an amazing job over the last 2 days to clear those up. They're still worried about any future bad weather over the next couple of days, so they've been working overtime to make sure that they can clear those creeks, because that's where a lot of the damage was done.
Yeah. The short-term consequences were pretty severe if you live there, right? You lost your water, you lost your power, you lost your sewage infrastructure. But long-term, this town is going to recover and recover pretty quickly?
Yeah, they're pretty stoked down here in the south. We've been speaking to some of the locals, and while it's some of them are saying it's been a minor inconvenience, but for some of the families closer to where some of the real damage was done, they could have lost their homes. Good news, as I say, they've done great work on the ground here. Some folks are slowly getting their water back on. They've been given a boil water notice for probably some 2 or 3 days ahead, so that's one of the main messages that they're wanting to get across to the community. But as I say, Roxburgh's a small community. They've had volunteers and council workers knocking on doors of mainly the elderly community just to make sure that the messages around their water coming back on are getting through.
This was a bit of a freakish event because it was very heavy rain on very, very dry ground, which meant the rain had nowhere to go. So you wouldn't expect to see this terribly often. Are you looking at infrastructural changes to make those rivers safer in the event of such weather in the future because they really couldn't handle it down the bottom, or is it too early to say?
I think that was a part of the discussions today. Some of the some of the creeks that have channeled water out into the Clyde River here have worked for decades, but the event that happened on Sunday night obviously was a lot different to that, and the volume that came through was a lot bigger. They are still in the response phase here, so making sure that the mess that was created from Sunday is cleaned up, but I think that's one of the discussions that will happen a little bit later on around whether the infrastructure is up to dealing with another deluge of the size.
Chris Farfoy, Civil Defence Minister, talking to us earlier. If you're in Roxburgh and you have opinions on whether your infrastructure is up to it, do get in touch. Text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Let's go a little bit north, well actually away north from central Otago. Sports clubs who use a popular community park are furious that they stand to lose their grounds if a controversial development goes ahead in Christchurch. The Christchurch City Council voted in August that Denton Park, which is in Hornby, would be the best location for a new library, pool and customer service centre. Well, that sounds good, but last night the local community board voted to reclassify part of the park and change its management plan, which will allow the development to go to ahead. And some clubs say they will lose everything. Logan Church went to meet them.
Denton Park is home to the local rugby football club and the cricket club, whose players have been using one of Hornby's few green spaces for years. But now the Hornby Cricket Club's president, Kevin Hornbrook, says they are about to lose everything.
Where we are at the moment, we're on our number one block, and that which would just disappear completely because with the ground coming out so far from the rugby club and that, we just haven't got ground here any further. We've got 2 blocks here in the park at the moment, but we won't even have one. If we go out to 70 metres out from the fence line that they're predicting at the moment, we then would have a 30-metre boundary for a senior game of cricket. We lose everything.
In August, the Christchurch City Council voted to proceed with a new $35.7 million community centre on part of Denton Park, consisting of a library, a pool and a service centre. This faced immediate backlash from the community, over 60% of which voted for alternative sites, including nearby Kyle Park. Kevin says he doesn't understand why Denton Park was chosen.
When we looked at it and saw that Kyle Park was the place to have it and all that sort of thing, and we got the backing from the community and all that it was going that way, we couldn't understand why all of a sudden it was Denton Park. That was our first downfall when we got told, hey, we're going to Denton. Well, hang on, everyone's told you they want Kyle.
The council turned down Kyle Park as an option, partly due to high costs associated with making the land suitable to build on. The Hornby Rugby Football Club now stands to lose one of its 2 pitches, as the new community centre is proposed to sit between its club rooms and the remaining pitch, taking up almost a hectare. Its chairperson, Lynn Hucklebridge, says this will have a big impact on the club and its members.
I'm absolutely gutted because to do this to such a beautiful park when the land was donated back in 1952 and the clubs have been here. Our club's 62 years old.
The clubs are also angry about the way last night's community board meeting was run. Its chairperson, Mike Mora, was advised by City Council staff not to give residents opposing the development a chance to speak before the vote. But Mr Mora says he let them speak anyway, as the proposed development would have a serious impact on the clubs.
I did what I felt was fair and right, because our responsibility as elected members is to advocate for and on behalf of our community. Some members of our community wanted to be heard on this matter at the meeting because it was on the agenda, and I granted them that right.
The clubs now have the rest of summer to submit their thoughts on the reclassification of Denton Park, which is one of the final hurdles for the development. The Christchurch City Council did not respond within deadline to questions from RNZ News about the club's concerns. But Hornby's councillor, Jimmy Chen, says the community has been lacking a decent community centre since the Christchurch earthquakes. These clubs agree, they just don't want it on their turf. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Logan's story is an example of how precious land is in or near our cities, and we're going to look at 3 examples of this now. Logan's example from Denton Park in Christchurch. Our next example is from New Plymouth. A council proposal to sell off half of a public golf course in New Plymouth to develop upmarket housing has horrified both golfers and neighbours. But the Mayor, Neil Holdham, says a development could earn up to $50 million, which would offset future rates bills and pay for vital infrastructure. Once again, a tug of war is taking place. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter, Robin Martin, has more.
The 83-year-old Fitzroy Golf Club sits on 38 hectares of prime coastal land in the city's east. The council owns the land, and the club, which has about 250 members, has about 5.5 years left to run on its current lease. During his election campaign, Neil Holdham made no secret of his desire to sell off at least some of the golf course land. And club president Mike Early says at a recent meeting he reiterated that desire.
He called us into his office and he said, "I won't beat about the bush." He said, "But this is the situation. We'd like to sell off half your golf course to raise money for the New Plymouth district. How do you feel?" And of course the answer is horribly disappointed.
Mr Early says slicing up the municipal course would be a huge loss to the wider community.
It's a green belt, isn't it? It's not just a golf course. People walk their dogs through it because it's a municipal council-owned property. They throw frisbees down on our practice area. So yes, I'd say the public and the general population of Fitzroy area are going to be horrified by it.
87-year-old Life member Dennis Rowe was enjoying a round of 18 holes with a couple of mates this morning.
So how's the game going?
Do you have to answer that? Bloody terrible, in fact.
Mr Rowe was similarly unimpressed with the idea of a housing development on the course.
Well, I've played here for about 60 years and I think it's not on at all.
And don't get Dennis started on the rates.
What do you think of the argument that a lot
No, I'm not worried about the rates. If they save on that, and then they go and spend about $70 million building that useless airport.
Mr Rowe's golfing buddy, Warren Seastrand, also reckons the mayor is off the mark.
Yeah, I think it's a myopic decision, triumph of the bean counters rather than promoting recreation. And the way this council panders to the hotel and the restaurant trade using ratepayers' money benefits a very small section of the community. I'm dead against it.
Over on Pooney Street, which enjoys panoramic views over the golf course, the idea had predictably few fans. Laurie Hall says house prices in the street would tumble.
We'd lose value on the house straight away to a great extent. I have been told I've just had the property valued by real estate agents, and they've told us we'll lose on around about $100,000 on the price of the house. I'm just wondering if the council is going to compensate us for that.
But Neil Holdham is sticking to his guns. He says there's another golf club just a kilometre up the road, and the Fitzroy course is a gold mine that could be put to better use.
To fund future large infrastructure projects, like potentially water reservoirs, walkways, those sort of big developments, and then taking the other half of the proceeds and purchasing more land for future development. So in effect creating a perpetual land development fund.
The council will discuss the proposal in the coming weeks with an eye to including it in its 2018 long-term plan when it would go out for public consultation. I ngā mutu mo te pōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Robin Martin aho.
So we've been in Christchurch, we've been in New Plymouth, let's go to Auckland. Sprawling, and as it does so, large swathes of arable land are transformed from paddocks, orchards, plant nurseries. into lifestyle blocks and subdivisions. That's inevitable, of course, with rapid population growth. But as we gain homes, what do we stand to lose? When it's micro-habitats, the answer can be surprising. And in the case of plant nurseries, botanists and garden gurus warn we could lose entire species of native plants, as the land and the very particular expertise of those working it are lost. Rare native flora isn't only found in national parks. And to prove it, Bridget Mills didn't have to go very far at all. She filed this report from West Auckland.
Only a half-hour drive from the city and nestled on the fringes of the Waitakere Ranges, Orotia is a semi-rural sort of suburb that, like much of the outskirts of Auckland, is slowly becoming less rural, more suburb. Jeff Davidson has lived here his whole life and has devoted the past 4 decades to growing native plants. He's nursed back from the brink of extinction numerous native species, including this not very attractively described creeping hairy herb.
Here we go. So that's the little Parahebe jovelinoides.
Oh, it's tiny.
And yeah, it's not exciting, and you can imagine without a flower you'd barely see it amongst the forest floor litter.
But see it he did.
I thought, I've never seen that before, and it turned out to be brand new species, new to science, never seen before, never described.
And it's endemic to Auckland. Jeff would argue it's the city's only truly endemic species. A few examples of this threatened little species sit amongst rows and rows of plants, but the gaps between them are widening as the nursery is slowly winding down its operation. Jeff's just turned 70, keen to retire, and has put the place on the market. He says a subdivider is showing interest in the 6.6 hectare site.
And he will probably hang on to it for 10 years and then put his lawyers onto the council and say you've got to change that zoning, and probably he'll succeed, and then there'll be high rises or something here, who knows.
Orotia Native Plants follows a long line of nurseries that have shut up shop, many after decades in the business. It's usually down to a mix of an ageing workforce and the fact that land, any land in Auckland, is worth a small fortune. But as we lose plants and expertise, what impact will there be on our flora and fauna?
Well, I think what we're seeing here is a dumbing down of horticulture.
Botanist Peter DeLang has spent a lifetime researching and conserving native plants. He says New Zealand used to celebrate diversity.
Now what we have is a series of commercial lines that are producing the same thing over and over again, usually hybrids, often things that actually aren't correctly identified. And they have squeezed out or undercut the specialist nurseries.
Peter's at Unitec now, but he worked for almost 3 decades at DOC as their threatened species expert.
And when I was working in the Department of Conservation, I needed research facilities to grow plants in. Didn't have any, so I used local nurseries, specialist nurseries, who they had the desire and the interest to grow plants that most people wouldn't. Orotia native plant nurseries, when I moved to Auckland in 1993, did most of this work for me for free because they were so fascinated by what they were doing.
And between him and Jeff Davidson, they've championed the plight of native plants, which are often in need of a helping hand.
But what a lot of people also don't realise is that Orotia, the streams there are one of the few places, well, it's the only place I've ever seen the New Zealand freshwater crab. It's very small and it's very retiring, but the staff actually found crabs in the streams because they were cleaning the streams up. So there, the long-term prospect, I would say, for Orotia is just massive houses, and all those amazing plants that have been planted will be flattened, and we've lost that wedge of biodiversity.
Landscape designer Philip Smith makes a point of using rare and native plants in his clients' gardens, and he's relied on the likes of nurseries such as Orotia.
When people see the plants, when you can get them out in front of people, they're just an abstract concept when they're out in the wild, whereas horticulture, landscape design is a lens through which they can learn more about them.
And he says it's not just the plants at stake, but also the loss of a wealth of knowledge.
You go in for one plant and you come away learning about 6 others, and suddenly you're a genius because they made you a genius, kind of, you know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter who you are, you could be just any old schmo. You go into one of these nurseries and then they're amazingly intelligent people, and you just come away just actually a lot more intelligent than when you went in the gate.
Philip says it's important people embrace what's native and special to New Zealand. So this season, maybe forgo the colourful roses and plant a few greener varieties closer to home. You might not be able to save the world, but you could help save a creeping hairy herb or two from extinction. E Tamaki Makoto, mō te hōtaka o te Yahiahi, ko Bridget Mills Aho.
Lovely piece, Bridget. Thank you. The government has accused National of leaving it with a whopping $20 billion bill, which has not specifically been included in future budgets. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says his predecessor failed to put aside the money for National's promised big-ticket Defence Force revamp. But Stephen Joyce says the money is there. Where? Here's our political reporter, Craig McCulloch.
For all the talk of fiscal holes, here's another one. But this time it's the government making the accusation. Labour says when they opened the books, they found a nasty surprise. National hadn't allowed for the $20 billion cost of upgrading Defence Force equipment.
The National Government never accurately costed it and made no provision in any of its long-term forecasts to pay for it. This is far from providing certainty.
Supplementary, sir. Government officials are now reviewing the $20 billion program to look for better value for money.
This is the responsible thing to do, given the mess left by the previous government.
But Stephen Joyce wasn't going to take that sitting down.
Mr Speaker, is the Finance Minister aware that the Defence Capital Plan is for $20 billion of expenditure over 15 years and is able to be funded by a combination of depreciation and the nearly $110 billion of unallocated capital funding over that same period of time, and as he considers it as increasingly frequent attempts to divert attention from his plan to ramp up debt risks looking a little silly?
Mr Speaker, I will not be lectured by that member who grew government net debt by $50 billion on his watch.
And Mr Robertson disputes how much money there really is to draw on.
The $110 billion he mentioned is based on some heroic assumptions that he made, is heavily backloaded and in fact only contains $33 million of forward spending in the next 10 years.
But Mr Joyce says it's a desperate ploy to justify the fact that debt's about to go up. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
4 and a bit to 6, which means we've got time to update you on stuff you all want to hear, like, for example, details being released about the wedding plans for Britain's Prince Harry and his American fiancée, Meghan Markle. Kensington Palace says the service will take place next May at Windsor Castle, one of the Queen's main residences outside London. And as CNN's Max Foster reports, the couple are having a lot of input into the arrangements. That's modern.
Now that the royal engagement is public, it's down to the business of planning the wedding. It'll take place in May next year, though no specific day has been announced yet. That'll be just after the birth of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge's third child, expected in April.
William and I are absolutely thrilled. It's such exciting news. It's a really happy time for any couple, and we wish them all the best and hope they enjoy this happy moment.
The venue is to be one of the Queen's favourite homes, centuries-old Windsor Castle. The couple chose it, they say, because Windsor has become a special place for the two of them. Keeping with custom, the royal family will pay for most of the wedding. The chapel, St George's, is where Prince Harry was baptised and has hosted many royal marriages, especially second ones. Harry's father, the Prince of Wales, and stepmother, the Duchess of Cornwall, had their religious blessing there in 2005.
I think that Windsor gives them more control in terms of the fact that they can have who they want behind the walls of Windsor Castle. St George's Chapel is a magnificent chapel with so many kings and queens buried there and tombs there. I think actually you'll find it be an incredible occasion.
The chapel holds around 800 guests, so it'll be more low-key compared with the 2,000-capacity Westminster Abbey, where the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge wed in 2011. Charles and Diana were married at the equally grand St Paul's Cathedral. Meghan Markle will be the first American to marry into the royal family since Wallis Simpson famously wed King Edward VIII, forcing his abdication from the throne. Like Simpson, Markle is divorced, but 81 years later, it's not an issue. As for religion, though she attended a Catholic high school in Los Angeles, Markle is Protestant and plans to be baptised and confirmed into the Church of England. The guest list promises to be high profile. Markle counts Serena Williams amongst her friends. The Obamas and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau are also likely to attend. It's unclear whether US President Donald Trump, though, will even be invited. Unsurprisingly, Markle will become a British citizen, but plans to keep her American passport for now. A glimpse then into how this couple plan to be married, and they say they're going to be across every single detail. They also want the public involved and are working out how to do that.
That report from Max Foster in London for CNN, answering all the questions that you have been asking us, or not. 50 seconds before the news, John, as an HR manager, the Holidays Act is confusing for everyone. The whole Act needs a revision so that everyone knows where they stand, should they be required or requested to work on a public holiday. Lots of people saying that, JR. Thank you. Lots of you contacting us and saying, what does happen? So we will try and get that answer out of the Minister over the next day or two. And says, great article on the loss of plant biodiversity and specialist plant people. It's very hard to find paid work as a plant person or a taxonomist. Despite the need for it, my dream is to run a plant nursery and grow rare plants. I just have to find a way to do it. That was Bridget Mills' story, a lovely piece of storytelling at about 10 minutes to 6. It will be online if you are just switching on. And if you're just switching on, here's the pips.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. North Korea says it has successfully tested a new type of intercontinental ballistic missile that could reach all of the United States mainland. The missile test, North Korea's first since mid-September, came a week after US President Donald Trump put North Korea back on a US list of countries it says support terrorism. In a broadcast on state TV, North Korea said the new powerful missile reached an altitude of around 4,400 kilometres, more than 10 times the height of the International Space Station, and flew 950 kilometres during its 53-minute flight. The leader, Kim Jong-un, says now they have finally completed the state nuclear force. The National Party says it will keep a watching brief on changes to foreign land sales criteria to make sure there's no negative impact on investment in regional New Zealand. The government is moving to restrict sales of rural land to overseas buyers. From the 15th of December, greater restrictions will be applied to applications for purchases of farms larger than 5 hectares. At the moment, it has to apply the more stringent rules only to very large farm sales. National Finance spokesperson Stephen Joyce says it's too early to say exactly what impact that will have.
I'd be concerned of anything that actually reduced the amount of investment in regional New Zealand, including farms. I note the Reserve Bank today said that the strength of the land market has been important for the resilience of the dairy sector.
National's Finance spokesperson Stephen Joyce. Tap water has been restored to Roxburgh Township, but it will need to be boiled. Running water and sewerage was lost from the central Otago town on Sunday during a flash flood, which destroyed the town's reservoir's main pipe and its power supply. People have had to collect water from street tankers. While the water is back, the sewers may be damaged, so residents will have to continue using portaloos for now. The main road, still cut north and south of the town by slips, and the Roxburgh Area School will be closed until at least Monday. The Civil Defence Minister, Chris Farfoy, visited Roxburgh today and says the damage has to be seen to be believed.
I don't think you can really get an idea of the damage that has been done, with all due respect to the media here, via the television or the photos that we've seen online, until you kind of see some of the damage that's been done around some of those creeks. And there were some very lucky households here.
Chris Farfoy says it's too early for the government to know if flood assistance will be needed for the town. A fire support truck has crashed on its way to a call-out near Taupō. The operational support vehicle was called out about 2:30 to a car that had rolled. A Northern Fire Communications spokesman says the emergency vehicle was involved in a separate crash with another car on State Highway 1 north of Taupō. There were no serious injuries in either of the crashes. An Indian migrant who's been denied a work visa twice despite already having a job here believes he's being unfairly targeted because of his nationality. Immigration advisors say a crackdown on visas is underway, with official figures showing a sharp increase in the number of work visas being rejected for Indian applicants over the last 4 months. Mukesh Kumar from Rotorua says Immigration New Zealand told him his job as a dairy manager did not match his qualifications, despite having a graduate diploma in business. He's now appealing his case, but says he has several friends in similar situations.
They are playing with our feelings. They are playing with our money. When they were needed money, they hired us. They called us to come and study here. Now they don't need us. They are just kicking us out.
Mukesh Kumar says he cannot work while he waits to see if he can stay, and is relying on the charity of his former employer and friends. Australia's Upper House Senate has passed a bill to legalise same-sex marriage after dismissing a Conservative push to allow religious objectors to refuse service to same-sex couples. It passed easily by 43 votes to 12. The bill still has to get through the lower house next week. Conservative lawmakers hope for a renewed push there to exempt objectors from existing laws against discrimination. Australians overwhelmingly endorsed legalising same-sex marriage in a postal survey. The new Plymouth Mayor says selling half of a public golf course in the city to develop upmarket housing could earn the council more than $40 million. Neil Holdham says the money could be put towards big-ticket infrastructure items and used to create a property development arm within council.
There are million-dollar houses all along the coast there. We conservatively believe that we could generate maybe 40 million, possibly more.
Neil Holdham says the sale is just an idea at this stage, but he hopes to include the proposal in the 2018 long-term plan for consultation. The president of the Fitzroy Golf Club, Mike Early, says the community will lose a valuable public asset if the sale goes ahead. It's 6:05. Sport, and the former All Black Charles Piutau wants to play for Tonga at the 2019 Rugby World Cup. The 26-year-old earned 17 test caps for New Zealand between 2013 and 2015, but was overlooked for the last World Cup squad after signing for Ulster. He's set to become World Rugby's highest paid player when he switches to the English club Bristol next season. The Tonga coach Thotai Kefu says Piutau is determined to play for them. The former men's world #1 Tiger Woods has hopes he can return to elite-level golf he was renowned for. The 14-time major winner is making his latest professional return this week at his own invitational tournament in the Bahamas, following his 4th known back surgery in 3 years. Just a month ago, Woods didn't know if he'd ever play again, but the 41-year-old says he's now pain-free and making full swings.
I'm still trying to sink in that I can start doing things like that, start being more athletic, but there's still some apprehension going forward, there's no doubt. And this week is a big step for me, to be able to play golf and be explosive and hit shots.
Tiger Woods. And a brace of goals to Ashley Young has helped Manchester United to a 4-2 victory at Watford in the English Premier League. Leicester City fought to a 2-1 home win over Tottenham, while in today's other matches West Brom drew 2-2 with Newcastle United, and Brighton and Crystal Palace battled to a goalless stalemate. That's the news.
Press freedom.
The sort of attack on journalists where you attack them in that way is just reprehensible, and then there's no place for it in a New Zealand democracy.
Māori representation.
It still should be better, and that was my message to the council-controlled organisations.
And accountability in DHBs.
You don't want to throw the babies out with the bathwater, and many of those chairs are doing very well, but there is a small number of urchins who do need to move on, in my view.
The Pillars of Democracy, Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to Noon, the founder of Australia's only advocacy and support group for partners of online child sex offenders says the same service is needed here in New Zealand. And after 10, teaching young and old to code. Mitch Resnick, MIT professor and inventor of kids programming language Scratch, on learning through play. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to Noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met surface weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel. Sunny spells, isolated showers, especially during the afternoons and evenings when some may be heavy with possible thunderstorms tomorrow. For the remainder of the North Island, mainly fine with cloudy areas. However, showers during the afternoons and evenings, mainly inland. Some thundery with localised downpours and hail. Nelson, Buller, Canterbury, Otago, Buller and... Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago, Buller and Westland. Basically, all of the South Island, apart from the very bottom, mostly fine with cloudy areas, however, scattered showers inland during the afternoons and evenings, some heavy and thundery with hail, localised downpours about the Nelson and Marlborough ranges. Fiordland and Southland mostly fine, but the odd shower about the ranges this afternoon, and for the Chatham Islands, often cloudy. It's 6:09 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Pip, our executive producer, just telling me in my earpiece that Victoria has just become the first Australian state to legalise euthanasia. We've just heard that from across the Tasman. We're trying to get someone to talk to us about that in the 21 minutes that we have left tonight. Last night, 25 hours ago, we led Checkpoint with the resignation of Waikato DHB Chair Bob Simcock, announced 4 minutes before we went to air last night. At issue, the overseas trips of former CEO Dr Nigel Murray and personal expenses totalling over $200,000 in 3 years. What's becoming increasingly apparent now is that people knew Dr Murray was spending way more than was appropriate months before he resigned in October. Why was so little done? Nigel Murray won't talk to us, Bob Simcock won't talk to us, the Ministry of Health won't talk to us, Jonathan Coleman, the former minister, won't talk to us, and now the new minister, David Clark, hasn't been available either. But Sue Moroney was a Labour List MP based in Hamilton who sounded a warning against hiring Dr Murray back in 2014. And as she told us on Checkpoint last week, she sounded that warning to Bob Simcock, the chairman himself. So a short time ago, I asked her if Bob Simcock was right to resign as board chair.
It was the right decision, but it was an awful long time coming.
It was an awful long time coming, and that's not me making a value judgment, it's just me looking at the dates. You asked Jonathan Coleman a written question I have here when he was first alerted to the concerns about Nigel Murray's spending at the Waikato DHB, and he said it was June 12th. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. So I was using parliamentary processes to hold the government to account and the board to account for what had happened. And Jonathan Coleman, when he was the Minister of Health, told me that he was first informed about concerns with Nigel Murray's expenses as CEO on the 12th of June.
Nigel Murray resigned on October 5th, but what is most fascinating to me is there was a District Health Board meeting on the 28th of June, so just over a fortnight after the Minister was first told about issues. Nigel Murray was in attendance, the entire board under Bob Simcock was there, and his expenses seem not to have been discussed.
Look, it was an extraordinary period of time where there was information that Bob Simcock was obviously briefing the Ministry of Health and the Minister of Health on, and yet not alerting his own board to. So they were blissfully unaware of the concerns that Bob Simcock already had by that stage, and were operating as normal, and yet everything, it was all anything but normal by that stage.
So what was going on? And obviously it's really hard to answer this question without Bob Simcock, who will not appear on Checkpoint, without Jonathan Coleman, the former minister, who will not appear on Checkpoint, and we have repeatedly asked them both, and the program is theirs if they care to front. We would love to talk to them. But do you know, can you begin to even imagine why this was happening?
Well, look, I was asking Jonathan Coleman about what action he was taking once he knew about the concerns, and his replies to me in writing were that he was just going to sit back and wait for the board to deal with it. So it was a really hands-off approach from Jonathan Coleman, and I thought it was just pure hypocrisy to see him making public statements today saying that it had taken far too long for Bob Simcock to resign as the board chair. This all happened under Jonathan Coleman's watch as the minister, and despite my questions to him, trying to put pressure on him to act on it, he simply did nothing over that period of time.
Right. Why was anyone in a position of power and also knowledge so reluctant to blow the whistle on Nigel Murray? Does it come back to this deficit that the Waikato DHB was running, real pressure on clinical services, real pressure to cut money, and Nigel Murray's preparedness to do that? Was he the ministry's man in Waikato, and was that why people were so reluctant to hear ill spoken of him?
Oh, look, I don't know why he got away with it for as long as he did. All I know is that if Bob Simcock had been watching him carefully like he told me that he would do, then there's no way that you would have had a CEO who was away from the workplace that long. There's no way that you actually would have had a CEO who wasn't putting his expenses forward for 2 years in a row, and the State Services Commission having to write to the DHB and say, where are your CEO's expenses? Those things were going on the whole time while Jonathan Coleman was the minister, and he was failing to act on them.
You blew the whistle in 2014 and said, don't hire this man. The Association of Salaried Medical Specialists, on the basis of what they were hearing out of Southland, said, don't hire this man. Annette King said, why have you hired this man? What can we learn from what we have seen here? How can the hiring of a guy called Nigel Murray, or the woeful absence of supervision of a guy like Nigel Murray, be avoided in the future?
Well, it raises some really serious questions for me around how well people on DHB boards understand their role in terms of governance and their accountability for these sorts of issues. Because I've watched while the Waikato DHB has, I think, frozen over the issue, when it became apparent that Bob Simcock hadn't had the adequate oversight that he should have had. Still, the DHB board were prepared to give full confidence to Bob Simcock in his role as chair. That, to me, says that there's some serious deficits in board members and what they understand their role actually is and what their accountability is.
Sorry to interrupt, but Bob Simcock, in fact, said to Karen Brown, our health correspondent, and we played this interview on Checkpoint, that it wasn't his responsibility, that Nigel Murray was up to no good, that wasn't his fault. And last night, the acting board chairperson told us that she didn't see how Bob Simcock could have known. So do the rules of governance have to be stressed to the boards of DHBs?
Well, look, if we've got chairs or acting chairs saying that they don't have responsibility for how a CEO behaves and acts, and that it's not their responsibility to have strong oversight on that, then we have got a problem, because that's what the New Zealand taxpayer relies on, is that the people who are appointed and elected to these boards are looking after the taxpayer's interests, and in this case they simply were not.
Sue Moroney, who was a Labour List MP in Hamilton throughout this period and spoke to Bob Simcock about not hiring Nigel Murray back in 2014, 16 past 6. The biographies of Green Party MPs have been reviewed following scrutiny around Golriz Garaman's legal history. The party maintains the MP has done nothing wrong, but information on its website has now been changed to show she defended war criminals as a young lawyer as well as prosecuted them. With more, here's our political reporter, May Heron.
Golriz Garaman has been open about the work she did for the United Nations, which included defending Simon Bakindi, a man charged with genocide and crimes against humanity in Rwanda. But what's drawn particular criticism is the MP's 300-word bio on the Green Party website, which omitted her role in the defence and focused on her success in putting world leaders on trial. Ms Garaman says representation for both sides are crucial for a fair justice system.
My work on defence and prosecution has always been equally a point of pride for me. I mean, I was inspired by the Nuremberg trials to become a lawyer, you know, where we said to the Nazis, you're not above the law, genocide is a crime, but we're not going to be tyrants.
A photo has also emerged of Ms Garaman posting next to one of the war criminals she defended. But again, New Zealand's first refugee MP maintains that's okay.
Every person, including those that are accused of very egregious crimes, are entitled to a trial, and they're entitled to be considered innocent until proven guilty, and I would essentially be letting down the human rights framework if I thought anything other than that.
Despite the Green leader James Shaw insisting his MP has done nothing wrong, the party has moved quickly to assess the other biographies on its website. The Greens are particularly sensitive to any accusations of a cover-up following the resignation of their former leader Materia Ture earlier this year. James Shaw says Miss Gutterman has done nothing wrong.
I knew about the cases that Golries had worked. I have no problem with people, upholding the justice system in that way. So I think that, part of this is politically motivated.
When asked yesterday, the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, wouldn't comment.
I actually haven't seen those comments, so I've got no statement to make on that.
The National leader, Bill English, says it's a matter for the public and voters to judge.
The information that's come out gives a different picture than the impression that may have been created, but that's really a matter for her party and the public to sort out.
This is not the first time the new MP has made headlines for the wrong reasons. Earlier this month, Golries Gutterman accidentally sent an internal email containing caucus notes to another media outlet. From Parliament for Checkpoint, May Heron.
Coming up to 19 minutes past 6, I don't know whether you wag school, but I might have been guilty of doing it from time to time. However, the number of children regularly missing school is growing, and some say it's not for any reason other than it being boring. But now school principals want a review of truancy services, saying they're ineffective. Figures published earlier this year show only 67% of children regularly attended in Term 2 last year, down from 70% the year before. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen came to work, he didn't wag, and he filed this report.
These Year 13 boys are doing well at school, but they don't meet the 90% attendance rate required to be considered regular attenders.
I know that my statistic personally is 74%.
I think my attendance is about 89% or 90%, so I've attended quite a bit of school.
Almost there, I reckon. Not quite, but almost there.
And they admit they haven't fallen short because of illness or family events.
Truant, very, very extremely truant. It seems like I don't need to be at class because I can catch up easily enough, and there's lots of things which are much more fun than class.
It really seems like a lot of the classes are really inefficient in teaching, and maybe like a good portion of them you don't have to pay attention to.
The reason I wouldn't attend a class is because I don't see it as being very useful.
But that's the sort of behaviour which has caught the attention of the Associate Education Minister, Tracy Martin. She wants to take a look at the attendance services charged with getting the worst offenders back to school. Mike Williams from the Secondary Principals Association says that's a good idea because some schools are extremely dissatisfied with their local service.
The service is very patchy. In some areas, schools, principals feel they're getting good service, and others they're very concerned about this level of service they're getting. And in some areas, it's almost no service at all, which seems to be down to funding, possibly indicating a flaw in the model.
But the Education Ministry says attendance services do a good job of working with persistent truants. It says the services received 13,000 cases of unjustified absence last year and closed 13,141. Taitokoro had the lowest level of regular attendance, and the president of the region's Principals Association, Pat Newman, says the truancy service is of limited use.
It's working in the cases where probably the school could have gone round and talked to them or sent, you know what I mean? But when the parent digs its heel in, they then have to hand it on to Child, Youth and Families and Ministry and all the rest of it. And then that's where it seems to come to a halt.
Pat Newman says illness, lack of food and the need to attend events such as a tangi are other reasons only 56% of Northland children regularly attended school last year. But he says another reason is that many parents in the area simply don't think school is important.
The importance of school education is perhaps not held as high as it is held in other parts of New Zealand. If you as a parent haven't necessarily had a successful education when you were a pupil, then perhaps you don't see it as important when you are a parent.
Pat Newman says an advertising campaign would help drive attendance rates up. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen aho.
Right, let's return to Central Otago. We were there with Chris Whaafoy earlier in the program, and perhaps the crop it's most famous for, no, not Pinot Noir, stone fruit, although it might well be a close-run thing on the fame front now. Anyway, the storm that hit Roxburgh also hit the area's orchards, and the fruit most vulnerable to early summer storms is cherries, but the news is mostly good. Although, as Glenn Madison of Golden View Orchard told me, some early ripening varieties were hit.
Yeah, the variety I'm holding at the moment is called Burlat, which is really for us is growing, traditionally comes in around about the last week in November. but due to the weather being so good this year, it came in a week earlier.
Oh, bummer.
So, yeah, this is the variety. It's not really well grown throughout New Zealand as far as commercial lines because it's not exported. So it's more grown for the domestic market and for stalls and markets like that.
Glenn says he lost maybe a third of his early crop, although the cruel fact is it still tastes good and they're delicious sweet fruit. It's just that consumers won't touch cherries with split skins.
I mean, at the end of the day, a consumer buys with their eyes. So when they see a mark, which is a line or like that, what it looks on it, or goes slightly a little bit brown, that people look at it as though that fruit's going to go off, which it is going to go off quicker, but there's nothing wrong with it.
And so what's this mean? What's this costing you and what are you doing? Are you still able to pick fruit? Are you still able to harvest anything?
Yeah, we got a couple of pickers left. I had to lay a few off as it's very hard going, of course. So we've really kept up. I've got a couple of, one a Wolfer in particular and a local, which we've kept them on. But their picking's gone from, you know, being quite good to now all of a sudden they're doing about a third to even a quarter of what they normally would pick in an hour.
That's Glenn Madison, whose later fruit will be fine and we suspect delicious too. Most cherries are still ripening, meaning they were too small for the rain to split their skin. Gary Bennett is a fifth-generation grower. He owns the Teviot Orchard Company, established by his grandfather 101 years ago. Now, much of his fruit is late ripening, and we spoke to him via Live View too, and I could see small red blobs of deliciousness on the trees behind him.
They're my cherries, John.
Which is good news, right? So they've survived the storm.
Yeah, they have. Fortunately, these cherries, the maturity wasn't up too far for these cherries to suffer too much damage. Just a little bit of damage in them, but nothing that significant.
There was some damage on early ripening varieties, so early stock may be expensive or have damaged flesh, but overall it does seem to be business as usual on the cherry front. Had the storm, by the way, been a couple of weeks later or brought hail, it would have been much, much worse. And funnily enough, and I didn't know this, the rain took some humidity out of the air, and muggy weather isn't great for cherries either.
The rain we had was over a short period of time. Any rain we have on our cherries, we can have a short amount of rain. If it's cold rain that comes in with, we get a bit of change of weather coming over from the south, it can handle a little bit of rain. It freshens everything up. It's the humid days where it's drizzling and the cherries stay damp all day. They just don't like it. They just start to split to bits. So a little bit of cold front coming through, a short bit of rain is fine, but anything that goes too long is going to do damage to your cherries.
It's Gary Bennett's fifth-generation grower who owns the Teviot Orchard Company, so there should be summer cherries available. 26 minutes past 26 minutes past 6. Tens of thousands of people living close to Bali's Mount Agung volcano has so far failed to heed official warnings to move to evacuation shelters. The volcano continues to spew clouds of white and grey ash, and a red glow can be seen at the top of the mountain. Officials say up to 150,000 people should leave their homes, but at last count the shelters had just over 30,000 people. Bali's airport remains closed, causing disruption for tens of thousands of airline passengers, including many tourists, of course. The BBC's Howell Griffith is in Bali.
With ash billowing overhead and tremors growing underground, Mount Agung's eruption shows no sign of slowing. Thick, muddy flows known as lahars are already spilling from the surface. They're dangerous, but not as devastating as the red-hot lava which could follow. In the mountain's shadow, they've been preparing for months. Everyone knows the drill. Children have been reassured they will be safe, as long as the evacuation plan is followed. For the thousands forced from their homes 2 months ago when the tremors started, the wait has been unbearable, and there's no way of knowing when it will end.
I have 2 young children. What will we do?
The impact of the eruption's already spreading, with more than 800 flights cancelled. The only way in and out is by boat. For Kerry Rani, it feels like a good time to leave.
It's quite scary. It seems pretty close at the minute. Yeah, so I'm not sure whether it's due to erupt or it's in the middle of erupting.
But some here are determined to stick to everyday life, whatever the risks. This flower seller lives within the exclusion zone, but is refusing to leave. She'll run if the lava comes, she laughs.
Through the day, the island's been hit by tropical storms and blackouts, just adding to the sense of disruption and unease as everyone here waits to see how this eruption will end.
That from the BBC's Will Griffith, who is up in Bali. Lots of feedback coming in tonight. Thank you. People really are confused about the situation around days off in lieu if you are working a stat. What is, particularly in the fast food industry or in fact the service industry across the board, the situation? So we're going to try and get some real clarity around that, almost a one-on-one for you. We hope to get that from either the Minister or the Ministry tomorrow, but it would be lovely to get a definitive explanation of what is required from you if you are an employer and what is available to you if you are a worker. Lots of weather comments. Hi John, in Queenstown, I feel like I'm living in a parallel universe. For the last 5 days our weather forecast is clouds and showers with hail, about 20. Where we live there is no rain or hail, 2 or 3 clouds and bloody 27 degrees plus. In the words of Dee Dee Smash, what's the outlook for Thursday? Asks Mike. Sorry Mike, I don't have the weather with me, but whatever it is, it's probably wrong anyway, bro. That's the point you're making. Councils, governments, it sounds like the middle class land grab is the Maori land grab all over again. Lies, promises and locked out of consultation. These were the 3 stories we looked at prior to 6 o'clock. New Plymouth, Christchurch and Auckland, and the urban sprawl, which is inevitable of course with population growth. But how is the balancing act, public spaces, parks, nurseries, that kind of stuff achieved? Lots of feedback on that tonight too. And lots of people saying Bob Simcock simply had to go from the Waikato DHB. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for being with us. We really appreciate your company here on Checkpoint on RNZ. On behalf of our excellent and hardworking team, that's it for this evening, but we will be back tomorrow night at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. North Korea says the new type of intercontinental ballistic missile it's tested could reach all of the US mainland. The National Party says it will keep a watching brief on changes to foreign land sales criteria to make sure there's no negative impact on investment in the regions. Tap water has been restored to Roxburgh Township, but it will need to be boiled, and Australia's Senate has passed a bill to legalise same-sex marriage. Our next news and weather is at 7.
We've all heard the one about lies, damn lies and statistics. What happens when you throw fiction into the mix?
People were looking at me in absolute horror.
I recently actually played a role of a murderer.
And he's lying to everyone all around him.
I don't feel like a liar. I feel like I'm trying to tell a story.
Pants on Fire. Available from iTunes, Radio Public and RNZ's podcast page. And on air today after 8:30.